Hello, everyone. Professor Mulchaney here. And this week, I'd like to spend some time talking about perception and the self, and how this is all connected to communication and how you communicate with those in your world, those you spend time with, those you interact with. It's really about seeing yourself, seeing your world, and how you think and feel about yourself and how you think and feel about your world. I'm going to turn off my camera, but you will continue to hear me throughout the presentation. So what exactly is perception? Well, it's how you see yourself and experience your world. Everybody has their own unique perceptions of the world and themselves, of the world and all the things in it, of all the events and so forth and so on. And perception is a multi-step process. So it happens automatically. We really don't think about it. We automatically, organically go through this process of selecting stimuli. The world's a busy place. There's a lot of things to see. There's a lot of things to hear. And sometimes we have to make selections among these things available for us to perceive. We then organize that stimuli that we've selected, and this means to arrange it in some way to make sense of it, to compare it to other information that we have perceived previously. And then we interpret it, we make sense of it. What does it mean? Is it important to me? Does it matter? And if something matters, we tend to remember it. And if something doesn't matter, we tend to forget it. And then, of course, there's our response to whatever stimuli. So say you're having a conversation with a friend and they say something that you find very shocking and you perceive it as shocking. How do you respond? You say, wow, I'm very surprised to hear you say that, or I'm shocked by that. For every stimuli that we attend to, pay attention to, we tend to respond in some way. It may demand a response, a statement to a person or an immediate action, or our response may simply be, I need to remember that. As a college student, this is something you do all day long. You're sitting in classes, your professor says something. Certain things are very important. You'll make note of it. You may write it down, type it into your computer, into your electronic notes. Or if it's an aside or a personal comment, that's not something that really demands an immediate response, but it could influence the way you perceive future messages. Can you trust what you see? If perception is partly what we hear and partly what we see, and communication is partly what we hear, that could be verbal messages spoken to us, and partly what we see, the nonverbal component that comes along for the ride. But can we always trust what we see? There's an optical illusion on your screen, and depending on where you look in the screen, other parts of the screen will appear to be moving. But the fact is, this isn't moving at all. It's a static image. If you'd like to see more examples of this type of optical illusion that can trick us and trick our perceptions, it's at this website right here, scientificpsychic.com/graphics. So there's plenty of those to look at. But the point I'm trying to make is sometimes we do a double take. Sometimes we really have to think and consider from various points of view, from various angles, what we see, because what we see or think we see might not actually be what is being presented. An important part of perception, as I just mentioned, is selection. We make selections about what we will attend to, what we will pay attention to. When I say attend to, that's related to paying attention and focusing our attention and focusing in on something in our environment. Imagine you're in the cafeteria at the college and it's very, very busy. And there's a lot of noise and a lot of people, and you're sitting with some friends. You see some other people you know in the background. You're going to need to focus in and select what you're going to pay attention to, because there's so many choices, and choices have to be made. Selective perception is this action, this process of making these choices, and we make these choices for very specific reasons. So selective exposure is when we expose ourselves to and pay attention to things that make sense to us or validate our opinions or points of view. Some people don't want to expose themselves to things that present a point of view that is different from their own. Think about the political climate in the United States. Certain people will only watch certain news channels because it presents a point of view, a perspective that aligns with how they feel and what they think. Other people watch a different news channel that aligns with what they think and what they feel. That's selective exposure. There's a problem with selective exposure because there's typically two sides to a coin, two sides of a story. And if you get the big picture, you're going to make more accurate decisions and choices about the information if it's worth remembering, or if you need to do more research or something else along those lines. Selective attention simply means we pay attention to certain things and we don't pay attention to others. Did you ever heard your mom or dad say, you only hear what you want to hear? That's selective attention. That is selective attention in a nutshell. We choose to make certain things important that we pay attention to and others we don't. Selective interpretation means we interpret things the way we want to. We interpret them in a way that makes sense to us and again aligns with our way of thinking, our perception of the world, our perception of ourselves. And then there's finally selective retention, where you remember what you want to remember and choose to let the rest go. I think this is critically important for any college or university student because you're presented with so much information in the context of a class, in the context of a semester, in the context of an academic career. It simply isn't possible to remember it all. So we have to make choices about what we will retain and work on remembering. Now, the organization part, this is where we make sense of it and organize what we have selected in some way so that it's easier to remember, so it's easier to assess, so it's easier to assign meaning to something that we've experienced. And some of the ways we do this is through proximity. There's an example in your ebook where it says, you're standing at a counter near someone and the person behind the counter assumes the two of you are together because you're close together. So you've been perceived as one, two parts of one thing instead of two individual people. That's called proximity. We also tend to organize things based on how similar they are to other things we've perceived, other things in our world. Sometimes we look for the differences. Oh, that's very different than what I've experienced before. That's very different than the last time I did this or experienced this event, this thing. So we make choices as we organize what we've perceived. This all works to help us make sense of what we've selected to pay attention to. And so much of communication is really about making sense of the words, making sense of how those words reflect the emotions or feelings of the speaker of a word or sentence or paragraph or monologue. We make choices, and once we make those choices, we need to make sense of it all. Now, there's a few things that help us make sense, and I have an example of both of these. There's the figure ground principle. When we see things, one part of what we see is the figure, another is what we would call the background or the ground. And there's also perceptual constancy. We tend to perceive things in a consistent or constant way, and we seek things that don't change, so it's easier to make sense of them, people and their behaviors, for example. Perceptual schemata is almost like a database in our head where we organize certain things into certain categories. Like, here's things I expect to see in a college classroom. Here's things I might expect when I'm shopping at the grocery store. Here's things I might expect when I'm going to a job interview. So when we experience those things again in a different context at a different time, we're able to easily and quickly make sense of them because we have this organizational framework in our head. We have this organizational framework in our head, much like we organize files and folders on our computer. We have those folders and the files that go in them inside our heads. It's called perceptual schemata. And then there's this other concept of closure, where we humans have this innate ability to fill in what's missing based on past experience, what we know. I have examples of graphic examples of figure ground principle and closure to share with you. This is the figure ground principle. What do you see first? Do you see a white vase, or do you see two black faces looking at one another? If you see the vase, The black portion of the screen, the faces, is the ground. The vase is the figure. The faces are the ground. If you see the faces first, they are the figure, and the white portion in the second, in the center, pardon me, that looks like the vase is the ground. And that is the figure ground principle. And you can look that up and Google it, look at all the various types of images they have to provide an example of this. Well, we do this as well. You know, you're experiencing the world around you, and you look and you focus at something, and you're focusing on this one image or this one thing that you can see visually, and everything else becomes the background. This is called closure. These are incomplete pictures of, on the left, you're saying, well, that's obviously a dog. Yes, but there's things missing, the rear legs and the feet and so forth and so on. But because we've experienced images of dogs or dogs in real life, we know their basic shape. You might go as far as to say, well, this is a Dalmatian because it has the spots. And on the right side, this is a scissor. Even though all these portions of it are missing, you don't look at this and say, wow, it's a random collection of shapes there on the screen. No, you're seeing a scissor. This is called closure. This is our mind's ability to fill in the blanks, to make our perceptual process easier because of past experience. And you know, I've said from day one, your past experience, your experience as a communicator is central to your success in this class, and your willingness to reflect and think about where you've been and where you're going. Interpretation is how we make sense of what we've selected. And it's helped by this organization work. It's helped by the schemata. It's helped by the ability that we have, the ability to close up and complete images and thoughts. You can even do it with the words people say. Have you ever found yourself being able to complete someone's sentence before they've completed it? That's closure. We assign meanings to those things we see and experience using our perceptual schemata and this art of closure. And also important when we interpret something is how salient it is to us. Does it matter? Salience refers to, does something matter to us? And if something's salient, if you're sitting in a class and the professor's talking, has gone off in a tangent, is talking about a place they went, something they did. That's not terribly salient to your understanding of the material in the class, but what might be salient when they stop that and start talking about a particular concept that you've read about, want to know more about, then you focus in and you interpret it as important, and you start to compare it to the rest of the information that you know, so you can organize it, remember it, make sense of it. Salience is an important part of our perceptual process. Some things that can impact our perception, and there are various factors, and this is not by any means a comprehensive list, but these are things that do impact how we perceive others in the world around us. Physical factors, how we're feeling at a moment in time. If you're very tired, for example, or feeling ill, you know, you're not at your best. So physical factors can influence how we perceive the world around us. Emotional factors, how we're feeling emotionally. If we're angry, we may tend to perceive things in a negative way. If we're incredibly happy, you know, we'll put a positive spin on things. And, you know, keep the sunny side up and think positive. Environmental factors, if you're in a noisy environment, that could impact your perception of words and people. Maybe if it's very hot and you don't like being hot, that's going to influence how you perceive people, places, things. Intellectual factors, your education, your intellect, your experience, all these things. Experiential factors, if you've experienced things before and you see something similar, you don't have to start from scratch and figure out why is that person behaving like that, or why did that person say such a thing. You go back and you think about your experience, and it helps you. So it impacts how you perceive the world around you. Cultural factors, and we're going to be speaking about culture in the class as well. Cultural factors can influence how we perceive things, because those values, attitudes, beliefs, moral and ethical and philosophical codes certainly influence how we see things. If we come from a culture, if a person comes from a culture where women are considered second-class citizens and they observe a woman acting in charge and in control of a situation that may be shocking to them, that impacts their perception of this woman's behavior. And also whether what we're perceiving is mediated or not. And there's this continuum of lean media all the way over to rich media. So for example, a lean media would be me sending you this PowerPoint presentation I'm sharing with you now and offering no notes or any explanation, and you have to figure it out on your own. On the other side of the spectrum, you have rich media, where I'm talking to you, explaining the PowerPoint, and to make it even more rich media, I can turn my camera on. So you can actually see me in my facial expressions and my body language as I'm explaining this information to you. So I think what I'll do is I'll stick with the rich media for the rest of the presentation now that I'm back. Hello. Some barriers to perception, things that can get in the way of you accurately perceiving things, people, places, and things in the world around you. A negative bias. If you have a negative bias towards people or a group or a thing or a place, it's going to make it difficult for you to accurately perceive those people, that group, that place. First impressions. It's actually called the halo effect. If we have a positive effect, a positive first interaction with a person, we have a positive first impression with that person, we tend to view them in the future from a foundation of having that positive first impression. On the other hand, if we have a negative first impression of a person, we may work with them and see them once a week, several times a week, every day. And when we see them, we give them that look, and everything they say, we question and wonder, are they being honest? Are they being sincere? That's called the horns effect. Halo, we make them an angel, and we think everything they do subsequent to that is fine and dandy. And the horns effect, you put the devil horns on people and we view them in a negative way. You need to keep an open mind. First impressions are lasting impressions, but you shouldn't make them a fixed impression that can't be changed, that cannot be changed. I've been teaching for a lot of years. I've had students early in the semester who haven't made a great impression, but by keeping an open mind and giving them a chance, I've grown to respect them and see that they weren't that person I initially thought them to be. I've also had students make a very good first impression, and it turns out that it was not who they really were, and I came to a better understanding of them over the course of the semester. Attribution, I skipped stereotypes, prejudice, and ethnocentrism, which are very important. And we'll spend time talking about these when we talk about culture. Stereotypes are fixed impressions of people based on limited information. Prejudice is a negative attitude towards these people based on those same initial impressions or thoughts and feelings about the person or their group that they're a member of. And ethnocentrism is this belief that our own culture is superior to all others. There are those who argue that we are all ethnocentric to some degree, that we believe our culture is the best culture and everybody should believe things and feel about things the way we do. That's really a closed-minded view, because there's lots of different ways to view the world around you. And one of the ways you can grow and learn to be a better citizen of our global community is by being open-minded and recognizing different doesn't mean bad. It just means it's different, simply means different. Attribution is when we attribute a behavior or an action to a certain reason. There's a reason someone's doing that. We attribute the behavior to a certain reason, and we can be very wrong about that. What we need to do is be more open-minded and willing to investigate and find out more. Allness, the belief that any one person can know it all and understand everything. It's an arrogance, really. It gets in the way of our understanding that there are different ways of perceiving things. Blindering is when we literally put blinders on and we only focus in on one little thing, and there's this whole other world out here that we're blinding ourselves to, and that whole other world might explain or help explain what we're seeing. And then finally, a fact, inference, conclusion. There are things that are facts. There are things that we infer we believe to be true or believe to be a state or a situation a person is in, or they're feeling a certain way, and we infer it based on body language, the words they use. But we shouldn't blind this line between an inference of what we think might be and a fact. What that means it's a fact, a real, true fact. There are such things in the world. To improve your perception skills, it's not terribly difficult. You need to do some work, though. You need to want to improve your perception skills, and you can engage in perception checking. So say you see someone at work behave in a certain way, and you're wondering why. Indirect checking might be to talk to someone else, a coworker, someone you have a solid, open relationship with, and say, hey, Mike seems really upset today. What's going on? That's indirect checking. Direct checking would be to go up to Mike and say, hey, Mike, you seem like you're upset today. Is everything okay? Sometimes we feel more comfortable doing it indirectly, especially with people we don't know as well. But we're always better off, if possible, doing direct checking, getting the information directly from the source. Of course, you have instances where somebody will say, everything's fine, don't worry about it. And the fact is, everything isn't fine. That means they just don't want to talk about it, or they don't want to share it with you. It's something personal. Change your first impressions, keep an open mind, and give people and give things a chance. First impressions, again, are lasting impressions, but they don't have to be the be-all, end-all perception impression. And we need to be open-minded and realize that sometimes we get it wrong, or sometimes we encountered someone when they're having a bad day or just a bad moment. Beware of selective attention, where you're only paying attention to certain things and you're missing everything else. Yes, we engage in selective attention. Yes, we have to do it. But yes, we must also recognize that because we're only focusing on part of the picture, we're not seeing the whole picture. And what's left out could be very important. Develop identification, identify with people, empathize with people, and try to identify the real, true basis of why people behave the way they do, why the world is the way it is, why this institution is as it is, and so forth and so on. And again, seek feedback and input from others. There's no shame, there's no harm in making sure you're getting it right. As a college student, I bet you do it in a subtle way already. A professor says something at the end of the class, everybody's packing up, and you might turn to the person sitting next to you and say, when he or she said that, do you think they meant this? Because I thought they meant this. And the person might say, no, you missed what he said after, and this is what oh, thank you very much. Or they may say, no, you're exactly right. Check. There's no harm in checking. This will serve you well in college and in your career. If you're not sure about something, check. Do a little research. I'm not talking about library research. Ask, find out, inquire, or continue observing, and maybe you'll find out a little bit more about why that person, that thing is the way it is. Now, all these things about perception are directly related to you. You have your own schemata. You've perceived things your entire life in your own way, based on your culture, based on what your mom and dad taught you as right or wrong, or your guardians, or whoever raised you. And the question is, who exactly are you? So one of the things I typically ask students to do is take the Myers-Briggs test. And this PowerPoint, in addition to this recording, will be available in your learning management system. And you can open the PowerPoint and click on this link to take an abbreviated version of the Myers-Briggs personality survey. It's a very reliable instrument, but of course it's not perfect in any way. But you'll look at it and you'll say, wow, I never thought about myself in that way. So you'll learn some things about yourself, but I don't expect anything groundbreaking, ground shaking to be discovered by you doing this. But what I want you to consider is, how does who you are influence and make you the communicator that you are? Extroverts, if you fall in the extroverted side of the extrovert-introvert scale, you're going to talk more, you're going to be more open about sharing your thoughts and feelings and ideas. You might be the life of the party type person, whereas introverts, not so much. So, how you end up classified using this tool tells you a lot about how you communicate and the communicator you are, and ultimately how you'll be perceived by others. Some important aspects of self include your self-image And this is how you see yourself. You know, when you look in the mirror, what do you see? And self-esteem is your assessment of your self-image and your self-concept. You know, you have a positive self-esteem. I like who I am. I like the things I stand for. You have a negative self-esteem? I certainly hope not. I certainly hope not, because that's something that will do nothing but hold you back in every aspect of your life. It's true. There was a time in my life I didn't really feel so great about myself, and I know that had a profound influence in the way I presented myself to others. And in that period of life, when I did present myself in that way, others didn't react to me in the way I would hope people would react when you're out there in the world. Self-presentation is the strategies you use to present yourself to others, and it ultimately shapes how others see you. Think about it. When you go to a job interview, probably dress nicely, you prepare, brush your teeth, maybe you get a haircut, and you're ready. That's a strategy to put your best foot forward, to present yourself in as positive a way as you possibly can. And that's a good thing to do, right? We want to do it. We want to present ourselves in a positive way. And then self-monitoring is our ability to observe and understand our own behavior and control it, and to control it. It's tied into the idea of emotional intelligence. You know, we're all unique people. We all have good days and bad days. If a highly emotionally intelligent person can observe and recognize when they're feeling a certain way and manage it so they can continue doing what they need to do. You know, the old expression, the show must go on. I'm not going to try to kid you, my friends. I've had bad days where I've had to go to work and go teach a class. I'll take a deep breath and I'll engage in some self-talk and say, remember, they're not here to hear about your bad day. They're here to learn about whatever the topic is for that day. So I literally have to control my behavior, manage how I'm feeling and how I'm presenting myself for the benefit of my students. You've probably done it as well. You've probably done it as well. And it's important to be able to do that. Now, all these words, self-image, esteem, presentation, monitoring, lead us to this most important from the standpoint of human communication concept of self, which is your self-concept, which is how you think and feel about yourself. This is the big picture. All of those things kind of rolled into one. It's who you are and who you want to be. You can answer some questions in your assignment for this week, which I'll talk about as I wrap this presentation up today, is to really spend some time reflecting on who you are and the things that define who you are, and then how those things that you are influence the communicator that you are, and how you interact with others, and how you form relationships with individuals and groups and all the people in your life. It's the person others allow you to be. And I'll explain this in the next slide, but because there's something called the looking glass self, which is we present ourselves to others and they react to that in a certain way. If we're behaving in a certain way and people are saying, you shouldn't act that way, or why do you think that way? Or that's not a good way to think, that's negative thought, so forth and so on. It may make us question how we think and feel about ourselves and have a desire to change that. Again, I'll get back to that. Your self-concept is ultimately impacted by your culture, your gender, and every other factor that makes you who you are. But culture and gender are some of the most important. In culture, there are rules, there's values, attitudes, and beliefs about how people in that culture should behave and what's expected of them. So if you align with things that your culture values, you'll probably feel pretty positively about yourself. But if you don't, you may wonder why you don't align, why you don't fit in the way other people seem to. Same holds true for gender and all these other factors that influence how you think and feel about yourself. Your self-concept is initially dynamic. As a young person, you're still at the part of your life where things change, where you think differently about yourself. Things aren't as concrete or stable. So I'm in a later life stage, obviously, than all of you. But there was a time when my thoughts and feelings about myself were changing. Before I went to college, I didn't feel very positive or upbeat about myself. I felt I was a little bit of a lost soul and I didn't have a very bright future. And I'm a disappointment to my family and to my parents and so forth and so on. But by going to school and educating myself and getting positive feedback from my professors, from my classmates, from my family and friends. I started to feel more positive about myself. So my self-concept changed over time. Now, I can honestly say the last thing I can point to that had a big impact on how I thought and felt about myself was when I had children. And initially as a parent, you're scared. You don't know what you're doing. No matter what people tell you, you've got to go through it yourself. But I was initially worried, can I do this? Am I going to be a good father? I'm not sure I can be a good father. All these things ran through my head, but over time, getting feedback from my wife and my parents initially, my mother, actually, my father had passed away before my children were born, and other family members and friends and people in my environment that mattered, I started to see that I was a good parent. So being a good parent, and I think and thought that I am a good parent, became part of my self-concept, but now it's fairly stable. There have been no significant events that have changed, had a profound impact on how I think and feel about myself since my children became part of our family here. So where do you get your self-concept? Well, I'll tell you just to start, you're not born with one. Okay, just like you're not born with a culture, it's through orientation and living within that culture that we receive messages and people model behaviors that are accepted and valued in that culture. Same is true of your self-concept. We're not born feeling bad or feeling good about ourselves. It is the product of communication, and it starts with social comparisons. We measure up to others in our environment. I shouldn't say it starts with, because we're not really thinking about social comparisons as young children, maybe a little bit. But social comparisons are when we compare ourselves to others, significant, important others, our brothers and sisters, our classmates in kindergarten or pre-K, first grade, second grade. And there are important reference groups. We want to measure up to and compare ourselves to others that are important to us. So for many, it's their peer group of friends. So you want to be part of the group, you want to be respected and a valued part of the group. So that's your reference group, your peer group, and you want to compare yourself to others, and you start behaving like they do and they behave like you do, and so forth and so on. Along with social comparisons, there are social judgments. This is where we talk about the looking glass self and reflected appraisals. We behave in a certain way and we get a certain type of feedback. You do something nice at home, or you get a good grade on a paper and you bring it home when you're a young kid and say, Mom, look, I got an A. Oh, that's great. You're a very smart boy and you're doing so well in school. I'm proud of you. That makes you feel good about yourself. That's the looking glass self. What you've done is reflected back to you from someone else. It's a reflected appraisal, and an appraisal is a value judgment. If you have a piece of jewelry appraised, they tell you what it's worth. If you have your house appraised, they tell you what it's worth. When you behave in a certain way, people react to you and tell you what it's worth. We want positive self-appraisals. Pardon me, positive reflected appraisals. You're a good boy, you're a good girl. And it's most important we get them from people that matter to us, mom, dad, friends. Self-observation, interpreting your performance in different scenarios. I know I've heard students say, they've come to me and said, I'm sorry, professor, I feel so bad that I said the wrong thing in class. I didn't have the answer for that question. And I'll tell them, it's okay. You're never going to have all the right answers all the time. But the fact that you're trying is a great thing. So keep trying. So trying to spin something that was initially presented to me as someone feeling in a somewhat negative way, that's okay. Learn from your mistake, and it actually was something of value. We all make mistakes, people. I can't begin to list and count the number of mistakes I've made in my life. There's been a lot, but what I can say is for the last 40 or 45 years, I've learned from each and every one of them. And I try not to make the same mistakes again, because that's the beauty of the mistakes. You own them, they're yours, but you can move forward from them and use them to build a more positive perception of yourself and be a more positive, effective person in your world. And then finally, self-identification. Do you know who you are? Can you be honest with yourself? What does your self-concept reflect about you? And is it something that you're proud of and are willing to share with others? Your culture, the roles you filled, your experience, all those things then play into what your self-concept says about you when you're out there in the world. The two most important aspects, I think, are social comparisons and social judgments, especially as we're growing up and we're comparing ourselves and interacting with these people that are important to us and important in our world. Some factors that can impact your self-concept in a positive way, resilience and grit. These are words that have been used a lot, especially the last few years. You know, we've all been through some very tough times, right? And it seems like there's light at the end of the tunnel, but you know, sometimes when you get near that light at the end of the tunnel, it's a train coming the other way. Hopefully that's not the case this time, but some people have demonstrated incredible resilience and grit. I've had students who admittedly said to me, I don't like online classes. I prefer to be in a classroom. Yet they made it through and they did well because they had to. They had resilience, they had grit. And I think that makes you feel better about yourself when there's something that you straight up said, I'm not crazy about, but you're able to do it and achieve at a high level anyway. If you all develop this characteristic of resilience and grit in this tough world we live in, you're going to be happier, you're going to be more successful. Again, developing a self-understanding, knowing who you are, what's important to you, what you're capable of, what you need to work on, where your strengths are, and where you can help others. These are important aspects of you. And if you focus on them and are self-aware enough to look at them and how they influence who you are, you're going to be a stronger, more successful person. And finally, expectations. We have our own expectations for ourselves, and sometimes they can become what are called self-fulfilling prophecies. You have a math test coming up, and you find out on Monday there's a math test on Wednesday, and you start the self-talk. I don't know this stuff. I'm not going to do well. I'm not going to do well. I don't even know why I should bother studying because I'm not going to do well. So 2 days pass. You keep telling yourself this. You don't really study, and you don't do well in the test. You're like, I knew I wasn't going to do well. Well, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You made it happen. Perhaps in those 2 days, you could have gone to the Learning Center or asked a couple of your classmates if they wanted to get together and study and work on this together so you could all do better. You can make self-fulfilling prophecies positive as well. You can say, you know, I've been struggling with this math and this big exam's coming up and I'm not the best at it, but I'm going to work hard and I'm going to study and I'm going to get an A. And sometimes you'll be able to successfully get that A. Self-fulfilling prophecies happen, but let's make them positive. And finally, the Pygmalion effect is when we live up to or down to the expectations others have for us. If someone tells, I think you're going to do great, I know you can do great, believe in yourself, that may be just enough to motivate you to do better than you might have done otherwise. If you want to change your self-concept, suppose, for example, when you start thinking about who you are, all these aspects of you, what you like, what you want, what you believe, suppose you're not crazy about what you see. Can you change your self-concept? Absolutely. Set reasonable goals. Say, you know, I don't like the fact that I feel like I'm impatient and unreliable to the people that matter to me. Well, be a little bit more patient. Work on being more reliable. Set reasonable goals. Don't set these outlandish goals that will be virtually impossible to achieve because that can only end up having a negative effect on how you think and feel about yourself. Examine your circumstances. Is there something going on in your life at a moment in time that's making it very difficult for you to make the changes you want to make and feel that you should make and could make if things were different? If only things were different. If only I didn't have to do this. If only that. And if you examine your circumstances and you can identify a specific thing that's standing in the way of you being a better person, being that person you want to be, is there a way it can be changed? Is there someone you need to talk to? Is there something about your job or your human relationships that are getting in the way? So examine your circumstances. Have some discipline. Sometimes all it takes is self-discipline and being more in control. This ties again into emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is really about how well we understand the emotions we're feeling, what triggers those emotions that we're feeling, and how to better control and manage them. And if we can do that with a little bit of discipline, the end result is a more positive self-concept. Are there people who are willing to support you? Are there family members or friends who will support you in your journey to being the best person you can be, being a person who can think and feel positive things about themselves? And I assure you there are. I assure you there are. I'll actually go as far as saying there's at least one. You're looking at them. If this is something you want to work on, talk to me about it. Say, how do I achieve this? How do I make things better? How do I strengthen the bonds I have with others? So there's at least one, but I'm sure that, I'll be far down your list because you have close friends, significant others, moms, dads, Grammies, grandpops, Mimas, pop, and aunts and uncles, and all the people in your world that are important to you. I'm sure you'll get the support you need. Orient towards others, a simple way to have other people react to you in a positive way, which will ultimately make you feel better about yourself, is if you orient and show interest and empathy, understanding the emotions and feelings of others. So don't make it all about you. How are you doing today? How can I help you? You'll get positive feedback. That positive feedback turns into you feeling more positive about yourself. And then finally, don't be afraid to take some chances. I'm talking about crazy chances like the latest TikTok challenge or something like that. I mean, push yourself out of your comfort zone once in a while. Psychological safety is doing the same things in the same way with the same people at the same places over and over and over again, because it's risk-free. We know how things are going to go for the most part, how they're going to work out. A psychological risk involves taking a chance and putting yourself out there. So if you're a bit of an introvert, try talking a little bit more in class. Or another example would be when you're looking for electives to take. Find a class that might be challenging for you, that might put you in a room with people who aren't like you. That kind of psychological risks can lead to a much better positive image of yourself. I did it myself. I graduated from high school in 1979. On graduation day, my father suggested I become a painter, not like Picasso or Monet, like a house painter. He had a very specific suggestion. I lived in a rural area in upstate New York, and he suggested I paint people's names and addresses on their mailbox or curbs because it would be easier for people like him, and he was a furniture delivery man at the time, to find where they had to go. That's what he thought. Now, I didn't feel great about myself then because all my friends were going off to college, and obviously I wasn't. My dad didn't believe in that type of thing. 6 years, I worked a lot of different jobs just to survive. And in 1985, I decided to take a psychological risk and go to college. I had been out of school for a while. I didn't know if I had the skills I needed. It was, for me, a huge risk, a huge risk. And I'll let you know a little secret. I started my academic career at a community college, Hudson Valley Community College in Troy, New York, as an automotive technology major. So that, I'll learn a trade anyway, something where I'll have a regular income. I like cars. I've always liked cars. I lasted in that major 1 semester. At the end of that semester, for the spring 1986 semester, I became a liberal arts major. And that was the beginning of my journey that was filled with lots of psychological risks to become the person that's sitting here talking to you now. So trust me, yeah, it's risky and you're putting yourself out there, and sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes you get embarrassed, but you know what? The payback, the reward when you achieve and get what you really want out of life, it's an amazing feeling.